have to do. Just listen.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm Dr. Greer, I'm founder of the disclosureproject.org and cseti.org. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks to bring you up to date with what we're doing on all our various projects around the world and to introduce some new thought guests. And I'm really excited today about having Stephen Sadleir with us today. He is a wonderful man who I've had the opportunity to meet and runs the Self-Awareness Institute and provides training in self-realization and enlightenment and consciousness to thousands of people all over the world. And he contacted us last year and has been really helpful in networking with our group with what we're doing with the film Sirius, which of course you can see more information about at Sirius, that's SIRIUS, like the star system, Sirius.neverendinglight.com. And I'd really like to take this moment to just thank Steve for all of his work and also for being with me today on this interview.
Well, ditto, Doctor. I mean, when you look at, we're both playing our part in changing the world. I love what you're doing to raise the consciousness of the planet.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, why don't you tell people a little bit about, your background and some of the work that you've done. I know you have a new book and all of that's come out recently.
All right, I'll give you the short version, and we can expand if you want. But I started meditating when I was 5, and at 16, I went on a vision quest and got a calling from God to study all the spiritual paths of the world. For the next 20 years of my life, I ended up studying every single major religion, denomination, arcane teaching, mystery school, and got to meet most of the gurus that were around during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And I wrote a book. It became a bestseller. So that's where I got my background, was studying world religions and traveling around the world and meeting with different gurus. And then I apprenticed with Vettatri Maharishi, a Tamil Siddha from South India, in other words. And he's a Kundalini master in a lineage that's thousands of years old. And he basically took me under his wing. I was his apprentice. And when he finished teaching, he had centers all over the world, 2 ashrams in India. When he was done teaching, because he just got too old, when he got into his 90s, he asked me to continue.
Right.
And that's how the Self-Awareness Institute got started. I really kind of picked up teaching from this lineage.
Excellent. Very good. Yeah, well, my journey started in a similar time frame in the 70s, and became a meditation teacher and began to learn Sanskrit and the ancient Vedas. And after some years of doing that, then went into medicine. I was always grateful that I had studied higher consciousness and practiced these meditation techniques and learned the science of consciousness before I learned the science of medicine, because the most important part of any discipline is understanding the consciousness of the human condition and of human awareness and how it ties into cosmic consciousness and what that interface is. And this is something that I was always grateful for. And the more I went into medical school and residency and all the madness that entails, the more happy I was that I had done it the other way around. Most people were sort of shocked that, most people think that I got involved with these issues after medicine. I said no. Luckily, I had spent a number of years studying this and actually learning to do Sanskrit pujas and meditation techniques and mantra meditation and various approaches to enlightenment before I went into the scientific world and the rigors of medical school. And it was a very wise thing to have done. I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it. And at one point I was spending almost 8 hours a day in meditation, and that's when I had many of my most important breakthroughs in my life.
Exactly.
And I was very glad that I took that time then, because it certainly wouldn't have been possible later with 4 children and, now 4 children and 6 grandchildren and medical career and everything else. So it was wonderful that...
And a movie,
yeah. And so, that's it. So, I think one of the exciting aspects, and you brought this up first time that you contacted me, was this idea of the conscious and spiritual component of other transdimensional and interstellar civilizations that are here, and how much of a key it is to understanding all of that is understanding the science of consciousness and the nature of the mind, which is the cosmic mind that's within each of us.
Exactly. Understanding consciousness, the stratification, different planes of consciousness, what beings are. It's a whole new science kind of emerging that, as you're seeing, as we're seeing, Doc, this emergence between science and spirituality, the science of consciousness is really just now in its renaissance.
Right. Absolutely, and with the contact protocols, I mean, people who want to learn more about this, we have an app now, Contact, ET Contact app as well on the for iPhones as well as for Android now, and thousands of people are learning how to do meditation and remote viewing distant places in outer space to make contact with these civilizations and to, as it were, vector them or guide them into an area and make contact. And, we now have thousands of people who are connected into teams all over the world, and the global Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative has really taken off in the last couple of years to where now there are teams almost in every country and certainly in every continent doing this. And the purpose of it is for people to become citizen diplomats, understanding the nature of cosmic awareness to these extraterrestrial civilizations. And I've always maintained that the reason that's the primary science that has to be mastered, more so than telecommunications or jet propulsion or all these other linear sciences, is that when you're going from one star system to another, you are, by definition, traveling beyond the speed of light.
Right.
And
well,
if
you're
you
transdimensional even.
Well, this is what you can't go beyond the speed of light without going into another dimension.
Right.
In other words, these are synonyms. And so what many people don't understand is that if you are a civilization that has mastered going from one galaxy or one star system to another, you have to have also mastered transdimensional sciences that cross into not only consciousness and thought, but also how you take a massive spacecraft and create an electron voltage shift to where that entire craft phases into a higher dimension, literally, and goes out of linear 3D space-time through another dimension to get here, because they're not traveling through linear space. Because if they were staying in a material form, they would have to be limited to the speed of light. And if it's the speed of light, the Andromeda Galaxy is a couple million light years away. Well, it would take you 2 million years to get there.
Why it worked that way. Yeah.
And 2 million years to get back. And this is why many people who in ancient times had contact with these ETs thought that they were having contact with the spirit world, because there is this overlap. There's a distinction, but there's an overlap, because if you have that level of technology, almost every aspect of how they would manifest would look miraculous to people who don't understand this new science and the new physics that goes along with it.
That's right. By the way, after reading your book, we did a book exchange. I was using your protocols. I got a little more interested in making, I'll say, physical contact with other forms of intelligence, because I've been used to other dimensional contact, you might say, or when you go into a transcendental state, you often make contact with entities that we'll call astral or other levels of consciousness. But after using your protocols, I was inspired. I actually got a visitation, and you're some of the few people I can actually tell this to without getting the funny looks. But a craft literally came into Laguna Beach here, and because I'd made contact, you might say telepathically.
Right.
And at the time, your own mind is kind of shocked by these things. My own mind was questioning whether what I was seeing is real. I got a beam of light shot right into my living room, and so if there was any doubt in my mind, it was removed. So what you're kind of opening up the Pandora's box, Doctor. You're really you are ambassadors. You're inviting visitations. You're getting other forms of intelligence to be more active on the planet. So I applaud you for that.
Well, and the whole concept behind the Close Encounter of the Fifth kind initiative. And for those of you who are new to this concept, the close encounter of the fifth kind is when humans initiate the contact as diplomats and invite the ETs here. And, you know, I coined that term in 1990, and subsequently a NASA research scientist, Dr. Richard Haynes, wrote a book about this called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, where he took the concept and some cases I had found and wrote a whole book about all the cases around the world where people had made contact with ETs and it had been initiated, or if there had been an interaction that had been deliberate and thought through by the person. And all the other categories of close encounters were ones that were passive, where, you know, someone was just driving along a road and happened to see something, or a craft was landed, or they happened to have a contact, or they went on board a craft, but it was all initiated by the ETs. This is flipping this around to where we're saying that humans have to mature, instead of being passive observers, active and empowered participants in an interplanetary moment. Because what I have always told people is that you know, this is not an age of enlightenment only on Earth, that there is a universal impulse moving through the entirety of the cosmos, and we are moving from one yuga, or very long era that's closing, Kali Yuga, into a very big new era. That's the age of enlightenment, but it isn't just Earth. It's on all these other planets. And so this quickening is taking place throughout the cosmos, non-locally, through the non-local omnipresent field of higher consciousness, and that by humans taking their empowerment and making contact as you did, these ETs that have been watching our primitive civilization develop for thousands of years, they are taking that as the signal that says, yes, now these people are ready for open contact. So many people will say, well, when will we be ready for that? And I said, when we make ourselves ready, and when we show the ETs we are ready. And as soon as we do, the whole cosmic doors flood open, and it is sort of a Pandora's box. And by the way, this stuff, which I get ridiculed a lot by certain linear types of people in the whole UFO subculture, was the main reason why the head of Army Intelligence and the CIA director invited me to come and brief them, because they knew that this was the Rosetta Stone of the future of contact, and they were appalled in some ways that I was sharing this with the public, because it was letting the cat out of the bag, because it's way beyond shining lights and lasers in the sky. It has to do with your mind shining through the cosmos, but in a very coherent way with very specific techniques. In fact, for those of you who want to join us, we're going to be on an island in the Gulf of Mexico in February, Marco Island, Florida, and we're going to be out there for an entire week with a team of people. I mean, it's limited to a small group, where we're going to be making contact this way. And we have literally had craft fly right over us and then send scintillating beams all around us that everyone has seen in the last 2 years that we've been out there on this island. And we have filmed it. I mean, the footage of this is astonishing. So what's interesting is for people to realize that once you begin to make that effort, the ETs go, oh, well, here's a group of people who actually, or an individual or a group, who understand the principles of interdimensional and transdimensional science and consciousness, so that they're indicating they're ready to make contact with us. Because, you know, being a rocket scientist just won't cut it. You know, this is something where you have to go from, you know, the paradigm of Wernher von Braun and rockets to the very high voltage classified systems that deal with what's been termed at the CIA WSFM. It stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic, and that is what they call this, by the way. And it deals with all the sciences, and they are, by the way, electronics that deal with the interface between thought, electromagnetism, matter, space, time, consciousness. There's a nexus where all that comes together, and in that nexus is also where you get into the ability to materialize, dematerialize, levitate, all the things that you read about. Of course, we're on the World Puja Network. We can talk about this in the ancient masters, where they would be able to materialize items, levitate, bilocate, trilocate. These so-called cities, or SIDDHIS, or abilities, are all things that are actually now understood scientifically, although they're very classified. And we're going to move into a time where not only will people have this ability in consciousness, but there will be sciences that will permit us to do this, not only for transportation and communication, but for energy generation, so that we get off of the dinosaur-era fossil fuel economy. And, you know, it is, in a sense, a Pandora's box, because all of these are part of a central operating system, if you want to look at it that way, of the transdimensional physics and consciousness that's been kept secret for various reasons. Some of them are religious, and some of them are economic and geopolitical, and of course all of that has to do with science and technology, because let's face it, one civilization's miracle is another civilization's daily routine.
Yeah. To that. Well, this whole new science of consciousness is evolving. That's what my book is about, trying to explain what is the nothing from which everything arises out of, is sustained by, and merges back into. Because physics and modern science focuses on the change, but all change rises from the changeless. From latent potential to patent expression, we see things appear to arise out of nothing. But nothing is the something from which everything is supported and directed by. And that's what we're peering into now. That's the new science.
Exactly. Well, and of course, pioneers like Dr. John at Princeton and others have done studies where they have proven that consciousness and thought moving through a field of consciousness is actually non-local, that, you know, the sort of the traditional reductionist, materialist view of this is that you're conscious because you have a collective aggregate critical mass of neurons firing, and it comes from the material brain. But in reality, the primal, the thing that is first is primacy exists with the awareness and consciousness itself, which then steps down through various dimensions into thought and astral and tonality and causality, and into then linear space-time. And I wrote a paper back in the mid-1990s about this called The Crossing Point of Light, and in it discussed in great detail how from consciousness and the emergence of tonality and the sound component of thought, which is what a mantra is, by the way, you not only have these meditative experiences, but that's also how linear space-time is manifesting from the unbounded absolute field of nothingness, which is not nothingness. It's the allness and fullness of pure conscious being. And the meditative experience, the samadhi experience, is really an individual becoming quiet and centered and calm, to where they begin to experience and actualize and realize that state within themselves. And when they do, then they're really prepared to be an ambassador from Earth to these other civilizations, because all these other civilizations have had to understand this in order to escape the limits of the box of three-dimensional space-time and the speed of light. But once you transcend space and time and 3D speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, that means you have crossed into what I call the crossing point of light, where you're in these other dimensions, which are increasingly self-aware and conscious and thought-directed, as opposed to linear, and they are increasingly non-local. So absolute non-locality would be the unbounded absolute state of mind, but between that and a fixed point in space-time, there are degrees of non-locality, and this is where things get really interesting in terms of experience and science, and that's where the wellspring of understanding is for all these so-called cities and various abilities and powers and mysterious experiences people have had over the thousands of years of human history. But this is now beginning to be understood very thoroughly and scientifically, and there are some pretty elegant experiments that have been done at major universities that have proven the fact that the mind is in fact in an omnipresent field, and that thought can even affect random number generators and biological systems and physical systems. And so this is really an exciting period we're in right now, because I really do believe that once we can finally disclose all the information about the new energy and propulsion systems that have been kept secret by a cabal of narcissistic and misanthropic fools that are running the earth into the ground, once we can get that behind us, which is what we're working desperately to do, we can then begin to focus on the real task at hand of the new era, which is the development of the science of consciousness, because that's what's really exciting.
Well spoke.
So what are your other thoughts about your own experiences in consciousness and how that might pertain to these other civilizations? Have you had more experience with that, Stephen?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is what I teach. I mean, the whole essence of the Self-Awareness Institute is to address people that are in the process of enlightening. They've already awakened to the point where they know that they're awakening. And the point is, how do you get into those trans-dimensional states? And so I was fortunate to learn, like you, from a master that really did know it and showed me not just an understanding, but showed me how to get there. How do you move into states? What we do with our Shakti is we actually attune people over our, whether it's in person or over the phone, we'll actually move the energy, the frequency and energy that someone is at will shift during our time together, so they will experience going into higher states and eventually into trans-dimensional reality. And that's what I always wanted as a kid. Growing up, I started meditating and doing my mantras and my yoga for years and years. I started when I was 5. I mean, I was really into this at an early age. But those kind of trans-dimensional experiences were a little bit fleeting in the beginning. And I always wanted to find out, well, how do you stay there? It's like, wow, I went into this profound bliss or awareness, and now I'm still as neurotic as I was the day before. What happened? How did I get into it and then out of it again? So that's the beauty of having a master show you. You know, if you learn to tune into these higher states, it's almost like you adapt to it, or your body gets used to it. It's like it becomes the default state you live in. And so this is how we're trying to take this science and, how would you put it, how the rubber meets the road. How do you actually bring it into the world? How do you make it real? How do you not just understand it? Because there's a big been there, done that, I know this already, in the minds of millions of people, but yet they're not living in a full illuminated state, and it's because they haven't learned how to connect to the part of them that already is.
Right.
And so our perception isn't, we're not trying to get to some place we think we need to be, but we're trying to tune into what we already are innately anyway.
Right.
And what we are, everybody else is. So when you realize the nature of yourself, you realize the nature of God in everyone else and in everything else, everywhere, all the time, and there really isn't any differentiation. Like you said, there's one mind, one consciousness that's just expressing itself through this apparent multiplicity. So we are like cells in the body of God, these forms of ours that come and go. It doesn't really matter, just like the cells in our body come and go. We don't think if a skin cell flakes off because a new one's already taken its place. And within our own consciousness, the fullness is already existent. And the illusion is that we're separate from that reality.
Right, and that's why
to the choir here.
Yeah, but we're sharing this with other folks and thousands of people who are listening, and I think that this is this is why when we go out into the stars together, there is a certain amount of training for astronomy that we do, and also using the lasers and using the cameras and using the imaging systems we have and the night vision. But the thing that we're still doing day and night when we're on these expeditions is really a very deep experience in meditation and having people have these breakthroughs. A number of people who've come who have spent 20 years going to various meditation retreats have reported that when they do this with a group, and it's this intensive program for a week, they actually have experiences like they never have had, and then they stay with it so that they can continue to do this work and stay in a stabilized state of deeper consciousness and easily travel amongst these dimensions and to other star systems. And they begin to understand that this is just the natural state that our conscious mind is always in an omnipresent field, and that with just a gentle use of intent, you can see a distant star system or the other side of the planet, or you can gaze a bit into the future or know something that happened in the past, that these are all abilities that are innate to every human being and not to the so-called gurus and mystics and what have you, that this is something that all civilizations actually report. What we have to do as a people, however, is move to the next level where we understand this is the new normal, and that the development of higher states of consciousness and these abilities should be as normal as learning to read and write, and that it's a birthright of every single human to understand this and be able to experience it. And it's actually a prerequisite for becoming an interstellar civilization where everyone on the planet understands this. And this is why this concept of an age of real enlightenment on this planet is so key to us becoming interplanetary, because you cannot develop the one without the other.
Exactly. Well, here you are playing your part, and I'm playing mine, and others are. It's kind of exciting, isn't it, to see people from so many different places. It's like it's happening organically or intuitively and innately, rather than hierarchically, as it was in the last yuga. So that's another sign of the new yuga.
Well, it is, and I get asked almost every single interview every day, when is disclosure going to happen? I'm going, well, we're doing it now. And they go, well, what do you mean? Everyone's expecting an authority figure like the President of the United States to get up and make some pronouncement. I go, no. That's not how this is happening. And this shocks people because people are so wedded to that sort of patriarchy. And I'm going, well, the reality is, there are two realities. One is that we have put together the information at disclosureproject.org for anyone who's able to read and write and look at a video to understand that all this is real. But number two, it needs to happen with the new social media from person to person, through Twitter, through Facebook, through your emails, through video, through what have you, which is how we're doing this film, Sirius, because that's being done not only crowdfunded by the public, it's going to be released in a number of ways. It's not just going to be, something where we strike a deal with one studio to release it. It's going to be in multiple platforms at once, although that's still being looked at. And one of the things that people have to understand is that the technologies that exist right now didn't exist 5 years ago to do this. And whether it's streaming on your iPhone or your smartphone or your iPad or tablet or computer or what have you, there's so many ways to get information out, and that it's very, very decentralized. And that so the reality is that we're at this point of emergence where all these, my autobiography is called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. All these hidden truths and all this forbidden knowledge can come out by all of us together doing it, one person to another, to another, to another.
Yep.
The other thing to realize is that the president doesn't know anything. I mean, someone asked me, I was having the
straw man.
We had one of our daughters getting, married this past weekend, and we were in Washington, and I'm meeting with some people, and afterwards, and someone asked me about the president, and I said, look, the president has the briefing we put together for him. It's not as if because you're the president of the United States, you can call someone in and get a briefing on all this stuff because it's compartmented. It's an illegal operation that's been illegal since 1954, 55, 56, that time frame. And the president is basically not going to be told anything that they don't want him to know. So everyone has this mistaken idea that somehow there's some sort of omniscience and omnipotence that goes along with the presidency. And similarly with the head of the United Nations or all these sort of figureheads. And because I've been the guy that's been at briefings with all these sort of folks, occasionally you meet someone in those high circles who is part of this sort of cabal that's been working and keeping the secret. But those are the exception. I'd say out of 100 top people that you would think of on your just random association, think of who would be top people in the world, maybe one or two of them know anything about this subject and have worked it in any classified fashion. And, of course, I wouldn't have believed that in the 90s when I was asked to brief the CIA director. what I realized, at first I got this. I mean, this is kind of a hilarious story. A lot of people don't know this story, but I was sent a FedEx by a man who was friends with the CIA director, and he said, the CIA director would like for you to come, and you're going to be the first person to brief this CIA director and the Clinton administration on this subject. And I laughed. I looked to my wife, and I just laughed. I said, "Oh, yeah, right. They're just wanting to pick my brain." Because I thought they were just, old spooks. And, well, we got to this meeting, and honest to God, the CIA director knew nothing. He was shaken to his core. He was virtually in tears by the end of the meeting because he realized that, the emperor had no clothes, as it were. And and so what ended up happening was that I came to realize that there are very high officials and senior people in governments all over the world who simply are denied access to this level. And that's why, there's been this running joke that when Jimmy Carter once was asked about UFOs, he chuckled and he says, well, I was only the president. I didn't have a high enough security clearance.
That's true.
And everyone thought he was joking, but he was not joking.
Yeah.
And so, what you begin to realize is that, there are these sort of what's been called the hidden collegium, as it were.
Well, there's the shadow government.
The shadow government.
My book, I mean, that's there. I don't think there's a question anymore. When you look, all you got to do is look at who owns everything. Where is the money? If you follow the money, which is what I did, and what my other book was about, you get to the fact that there's less than 1% of the world that owns everything, all the resources, the ability to make money, ultimate control, leading control of the major corporations, and all the industries all over the world. There's a pyramid, and you can trace it all the way to a very small group of people, all the way back to the foundation of our country. It's amazing. So that's money and power, the secret history. See, that's part of our awakening, too, and that's what I enjoy about you is you bring awareness into the real world, too, because until we awaken to see that there is, in fact, a cabal, there is a special interest group, by whatever name you want to call it, that has an amazing amount of control over the media and what is presented and how it's presented, and that's why most people kind of know there's extraterrestrial intelligence, but we're not hearing about it on the news. It's not a part of our life, but that's by plan. That's deliberate. What we think, we're told what to think. There's a propaganda instrument in play that has a tremendous power over the consciousness of the masses. And so we're actually awakening. Part of our awakening is realizing that we've been played. There's people trying to manipulate us.
Well, and there's a very good reason for why this particular issue got the lid slammed on it so tightly. There was actually more openness in the 40s and 50s than there is today.
Exactly.
Because once they figured out the physics behind the propulsion and energy generation of these devices that the public incorrectly call UFOs. They're not unidentified and they don't fly. But anyway, that's the moniker given to them after they figured out that they were not unidentified and they did not fly. But at any rate, that's what they've been called. It's sort of a mind fuck, excuse my French. And in reality, it was between 1945 and 1954, in that period, that they figured out exactly how these objects operate, were able to reproduce it, and that's when everything then went deep black classified, and then the entire Department of Defense and military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower called it, got reorganized through the Rockefeller Commission in around 1956, and it's been downhill since because there has basically been a coup d'etat so that no president and no Congress has had the reins of control over these operations for over 50 years, now going well nigh on 60 years. And so the result is a very deep dysfunction, and the reason this is so relevant is that no matter what we may do, you can sit in an ashram and meditate all day long, but if you have 7 billion people who are cannibalizing and destroying the biosphere because of the dysfunction of our society and the secrecy, which is not only a sign of the dysfunction, but also a cause of many dysfunctions, that this secrecy is having a real effect. It's not just like having a secret order of Masons in the 1700s. Now the consequences are that you have 7 billion people trying to use oil and gas and coal to have something resembling a high-tech civilization. And yet, even though we have all these computers and electronics, they're running off of a coal-fired power grid, which is from the 1800s. And so there's this disconnect between, and I speak about this a great deal with folks that I know in Silicon Valley who tend to be, one of the people I met with not long ago in the last couple of months has worked very closely with the founders of Google. And I said, yes, well, that's all very fine, but just remind them that their server farms, which are gobbling up gigawatts of electricity, are running off an 1800s power grid and paradigm, and that's what we need to fix. Because you can come out with as many multi-hundred-billion-dollar IPOs in the high-tech sector you want, but all of it's low-tech, in my opinion, if you're running it off of a system that's destroying the biosphere of the planet and killing our precious mother Gaia, the Earth, which has the sustain life, not only for us, but for all of the other God's creatures on this planet. And so, but this becomes an issue of, even though it seems like a material science and discussion we're having right now, it's actually a very deeply spiritual issue. It's sort of where ecology and environmentalism and spirituality come together. And that is, what are we going to do as a people in a compassionate way to bring forth the sciences and technologies that would step on the toes of this cabal of special interests, but which is desperately needed by the people. Well, we have to figure out a way to do that, and that's why, I in addition to doing the CE5 initiative, we started disclosureproject.org, and also now are doing this film, Sirius, because we feel that the public needs to understand that there is a connection between the secrecy around UFOs and the fact that, over half the public believe there's intelligent life out there, but the connection between the secrecy on that issue and how we're living right now today, you with your computer and headset running off of a electric generation system that, even as we're speaking on this phone line, is destroying the planet.
Yeah. Well, as you know, this information is starting to be leaked out into the mainstream. More and more information. It's kind of like putting a finger in the dike. The cracks keep appearing, bringing forth how to create free energy. And I know you're very familiar with some of these sciences and systems. It's kind of an exciting time because we could realize in our lifetime a whole new energy source. It would not only change the economics of the world and our dependence on fossil fuels, but it would change the geopolitical situation. So much of it, of the world and our wars have been revolved around petroleum. Imagine if little villages in Africa, or even ourselves, driving a car that ran on, electromagnetism. Pretty exciting.
Well, and those exist already. I tell people the good news in all this discussion is that the science is known. The technologies exist, even if they've been classified, and what we have to do is come together not only as citizen diplomats to make contact, but as ambassadors to Earth herself to bring these technologies out. And in fact, the film Sirius, when the filmmaker and I first met about a little over a year ago, the discussion was really centered around this film creating a global activist movement to create a non-governmental and not a big corporation, but a non-governmental, non-military industrial complex entity to put the scientists together that we have identified who understand this physics and to develop these new energy systems and bring them out as quickly as possible, where all the research and development would be going on virtually open source, and in fact we'd have live streaming of our research on the internet so that people could not suppress it, so that if the jackbooted thugs came in to try to seize a device that was breaking through into the zero-point energy field, that the whole world would be watching. And this is a very we've analyzed it, and there have been so many thousands of brilliant people, from Nikola Tesla to the present day, who have known this science, but who keep getting threatened and having their technologies and their inventions confiscated. Yeah. And the only way to change that and it can be done now with the social media, is to include the whole world and have the whole world watching. So then if these folks want to walk into that 1,000-watt spotlight and get exposed for the fascistic, misanthropic nut jobs that they are, they'd have to do it in front of the whole world. And I think this is exactly what the reason we want this film to come out, and in it we're going to ask people to contribute, whether it's $1 or $1 million, to opening a research and development new energy center where we can bring these technologies out, but in a very non-secretive way. It won't be like bringing out the next iPhone 5, because it will be done in a way where the whole public will know exactly what we're working on, what are the platforms, and the instant that there's a breakthrough, it's being seen live on the Internet. And the reason that's so important is that then you cannot stop it. And if you do try to stop it, it's conspicuous. A lot of people have asked me, how is it that I'm still alive, having worked in all these circles and brought out 500 top-secret military people's testimony and documents? I said, look, there are too many millions of people who've heard about this. And in 2001, when we did the National Press Club event, almost 1 billion people ended up seeing that. So it becomes very awkward for them to step into that, because these are folks, they're sort of like vampires. They sort of operate best in the middle of the night or something. It's like cockroaches. You put the light on, they all scurry into these little dark places. And this is why I tell people not to give into the fear, but to do this in the light and with confidence and with the security of knowing of a higher power, but also with the strength in numbers. Because if you have millions of people doing this, Stephen, you have a real advantage, because, what happens then is that it becomes very, very difficult for them to intimidate that. And unfortunately, in the past, it's been a divide and conquer strategy where, you have these folks working in some secret lab, or you have an individual inventor who's just working out of his garage. Well, that person is no match for the national security apparatus that's going to fall down on their heads. Right. However, if you do it this other way, then the worm's going to turn.
Yeah, and it's not just one point. There's all of us. There's multiple points. You can't put a lid on them all.
That's right.
So I want to support you in that. I'll get our organization, Self-Awareness Institute, and the other ones too. And then we all have other groups that we know. So it's that critical mass. We, like you said, scale it up so that millions of people all see this together. Kind of like what you did with the Disclosure Project. That got
exactly. And we're going to see, that's what we want to do with the Energy Project, so that then we can raise a modest amount. It won't be like trying to do the CERN $2 billion reactor, but if we can raise $5 to $10 million from the public, maybe in that range, you can then open a facility with the right equipment and the right people. And given the fact that I'm holding a CD that has several thousand pages of previously classified patents and electromagnetic designs on them, I'm fairly confident that in 12 to 18 months we'd have something out, or at least to be so. But you can't do that out of the boot of your car. You've got to have a properly equipped lab with people working on it, and you can't do it with just a couple of $100,000. In fact, our science advisor calculated what it would be just to get the right equipment with the very high voltage analyzers in this laboratory is around $400,000 to $500,000, which isn't a lot for a research lab, but it's a lot if you don't have it. So what we want to do is go to the public with this film and say, here is the truth, here's the secrecy, and here's why it's been kept secret. And one of the key purposes of serious.neverendinglight.com is to get people up to speed on that, so that they then support a public initiative that's not through the government or the Department of Energy or some big university where all this is going to get snarfed up into a black hole, but where then we would lead this research effort and bring it out, because it isn't a 5 to 10 year research project. It's a much shorter project, because we've gathered over the last 20 years some of the most brilliant scientists in the world, but also some of the most explosive technical documents and information, which can then be put to the test. And I think that that's why the film will become such an important in a sense, shield behind which all this other work can be done. It'll be like a protective process, and also develop the network. And we're actually going to be doing something. Those of you who are interested, during the Sundance Film Festival, I'm going to be at Cicero's on Main Street with actor Thomas Jane, who's doing our voiceover, and some of the people, the filmmakers, and myself having a reception. And those of you who want to join me, it's going to be there at Sundance. The information's on our websites, and I hope to see anyone who's going to be in the Park City, Utah area next Wednesday. It'll be the 23rd, I believe it is, of January, to join us there if you want to meet us and see a trailer for the film. The other thing, I just wanted to report, you asked about this, Stephen. Many of you have been asking, we wanted to have this film finished about a month ago, but as you know, the filmmaker's father was shot and killed during the Sikh Temple massacre, which delayed us a month or two. But right now, the main delay is because we're waiting for the geneticist who's doing the work on the genetic material that we got from this little possible extraterrestrial being. And if you want to see this, you can go to Sirius.neverendinglight.com. I just received in the last 2 days a report from this geneticist and a medical doctor who is the leading person in the world on skeletal deformities in children and fetuses and humans, and who literally wrote the textbook on it. And he has looked at the CAT scan and the X-rays and has concluded, number one, it is no known genetic defect. This is big news. Number two, it is not a product of conception. In other words, it is not a miscarried or aborted fetus. It's about a 5 to 7 year old. Now, this is a 6-inch tall being. It's a 5 to 7 year old being because of the bone density. We had an indication of this from the original radiologist that did, who was head of the radiographic center, that took the X-rays in a foreign country where we went in late September, early October. And she was the director of this, and she looked at this. She says, this is not a neonatal or a fetus or a miscarried, what have you. This is a being that was up and around, because look at the bone density. Well, this person, who is the world's expert in these skeletal anomalies, number one, has stated that this is no known syndrome, and number two is very definitely a 5 to 7 year old. So we're almost certainly dealing with a humanoid of unknown origin. The genetic work is just now getting underway because some of the equipment that was needed, it's being done at one of the top Ivy League university genetic labs, was being held up in customs for about a month or two. All the equipment is there now, and we're beginning to start the genetic testing. So we hope in the next month we will get all of that information wrapped up. But in a sense, the genetic testing, since there's no database of ET genes, would be a process of exclusion anyway. And the report from this other expert, who is the most renowned person in the world on skeletal deformities, is probably going to be the most definitive thing we're going to have. And I'm here to announce today that this is really quite an astounding discovery, that in fact this little 6-inch tall, 2-arm, 2-leg being is in fact a humanoid that was in the 5 to 7 year old range. If it was a male, it would have been more like a 5-year-old. If it was female, probably more like 7 years old. Now, this is assuming Earth development and Earth calcification of bones, et cetera, and so on and so forth. But the point being, it is not a deformed fetus because it would not have that level of calcium in it. And we suspected that from the beginning, but it wasn't until we got these renowned experts to look at the actual X-rays and CAT scans that we were able to determine that, and that was just reported back to me in the last couple of days. So this is incredible news, in fact, very big scientific news.
Very exciting. More like that. Breaking ground, Doctor, breaking ground.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, I mean, this is exactly what has to happen, and it's my understanding the area of the world where this little being was found there are others. And at some point, if we were able to get the research funds to do it, we would take an expedition back to that area, because I suspect there's more where this one came from. In fact, we know there are. It's also in an area where there have been many of these UFOs seen going in and out of the Andes. It's from South America, and many of the native tribal people have reported these very small creatures. It was funny because today, and I was in meditation, I was thinking of, I feel like Gulliver's Travels, because this being, if the adults are only a foot or so tall, and I'm 6'4" and weigh, I'm a bodybuilder, I weigh 230 pounds, and I'm 6'4", I'd be like this giant. But on the other hand, we know there are accounts of ETs that are in the 18 to 30 feet tall, where I would be tiny like one of these creatures. So, the universe is a big place, and it's almost certain that there's going to be creatures that are a few inches tall and creatures that are 20 and 30 feet tall. And in fact, there are ancient texts that talk about these sorts of things, which used to be regarded as sort of a mythology. And now we're beginning to realize, well, it wasn't such mythology. It was actually based on some things that people actually saw.
Yeah, well, the angels or the Anunnaki, as you know, our whole world history is dotted with accounts of some kind of more intelligent humanoid figures coming to Earth and going back, coming and going. It's all over the world.
Right. And some of them may have been actually from the angelic realm, which is separate from physical planets, but so people shouldn't confuse those. But you could understand that if 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, people were to encounter some luminous craft coming from outer space with these different kinds of creatures coming out of them, that they would consider them gods or angels or what have you, because they would have no point of reference. In fact, I always tell the story of in the World War II. I don't know if you've read this book, Stephen, about the cargo cults of the Pacific, where when we were going to some of these islands in the Pacific in World War II and landing our little propeller planes out there, that the native peoples had never seen Western civilization or a white person or a plane or anything. And they were convinced that not the occupants so much, but the planes were from the gods. And after we left, they actually built statuary, and they actually built temples based on
kind of worship the airplane.
Yes, they were, and they were made like airplanes out of sticks and wood and stone and stuff. And so, it's very interesting that it's sort of like The Gods Must Be Crazy, that old movie that was so funny, where a cook bottle's thrown out over this tribe in Africa, and it becomes this point of great contention. But so I always caution people about that, and that we have to take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, if we're dealing with a civilization that's several 100,000 to several million years more developed than we are, almost every manifestation of their technology and culture will look like a miracle or mystical to us.
Yeah.
Because if I went back, I live up the road here from Thomas Jefferson's house. If I could go back and visit Thomas Jefferson at Monticello and show him my iPhone, I'd probably be burned at the stake at a witch. Well, maybe in Salem, Massachusetts. I don't know about. I think Thomas Jefferson was more open-minded. Plus, apparently,
he actually found a craft. There's a notice in the historical record that says Thomas Jefferson was witness to a disc-shaped craft. Did you know that?
Yes, and I have no doubt that they were spotted. And it's all through medieval art and the Renaissance period where these were represented. And these civilizations have been around since the beginning of humankind. And we're at this time now where we're finally at the point where we can understand it, acknowledge it, and most excitingly become ambassadors and have contact openly with these civilizations. And this is what it's not for just Hillary Clinton and a few people at the State Department to do. By the way, they're not doing it. So it's up to us to do it, and that's what's exciting. It's very much grassroots, and that's why we encourage people to get involved and do what you did. Just give it a try, and when you do, and you're aware of it, and you put out that thought and invite these ETs to make contact, people are kind of astonished how easy it is to do and how much these civilizations they're actually waiting. I've been told they're eager and waiting for humans to extend the hand of invitation to them.
And so we are, and so it is. Hey, one of the things I thought would be valuable to share, I don't know if you remember, but before I dedicated my life to writing and teaching meditation, I was an investment banker and a venture capital analyst.
Oh, yes.
And one of the things I notice is with all these new technologies like free energy devices and things, you need to be real careful who you accept money from.
Oh, absolutely.
Some companies have gotten in a sticky situation because they got money from DARPA. And DARPA is actually kind of the venture fund for the Department of Defense. And once you get in bed with them, they start to control you and your technologies. You got to be real careful of the people you associate with because money seems to corrupt these new technologies. People use it to gain control of the technology and then kill it. So it never
Yes.
gets out into the field.
Oh, yes, we're very aware of that. We've studied this, and in fact, Dr. Thomas Bearden and I have done an exhaustive look at how many of these have fallen into the clutches through these sort of business shenanigans. And so that's why I think you have to, be very careful about what organization controls and even puts funds in and what their rights, if any, are. My view of it is that the people who have the money should have no control over the development and the outcome of the technologies. Now, that is not what normally happens in venture capital. I call it vulture capitalism. But you're right. You're 100% right, Stephen. You have to be very, very careful, which is another reason why we would like to see the film create sort of a zeitgeist in society about this and then have the public put the funds in to support the research and development and bring it out, rather than it coming from, some big corporate venture capitalist or what have you, unless the person was really an angel funder, because the problem is exactly what you described. So many of these technologies that have come along over the years have actually gotten gobbled up and then destroyed by the people who got involved financially, because they end up being straw men who are actually representing the cabal.
Well, that's what Morgan did with Tesla. That's right. That's happened many, many times since, and even recently, in my own experience, I saw where people would come in and say, well, now we got the technology, and they would either just sit on it or they would kill it.
Right.
And if you tried to pull it out, they would have lawyers on you. They will go after you with everything they got.
Correct. That's right.
So,
and that's why this has to be done. You have to learn from history, or you're going to be doomed to repeat it. And you're very correct in your assessment of that.
The other thing it's good to know, and I'm sure you know this, Steve, but for the sake of the audience, is that the entire Internet is watched. There is no privacy on the Internet. It was bought and paid for by the Department of Defense. They admit that virtually all communication going through fiber optic lines is watched. They have splitter cables at all the points of presence, and they can watch everything coming in or out. Everything that happens, you have no privacy.
That's right, which means that this is why I laugh when people say, I'm going to develop one of these things and do it privately. I said, no, you're not. I said, you just don't understand what the technologies are that are going to be watching you. So my view of it is to turn that around. See, we did this with Disclosure Project. Everyone's going, you need to be very secretive. I said, no, we need to be very open. So in other words, it's like Aikido. You take that energy, you flip it around. Exactly. And so their strong suit is that they're very secretive, they're masters of the dark and of spying, but you don't buy into that. What you do is say, fine, but you know what? The whole world's watching this too, along with the National Security Agency. So tough kazungas. This is what's going to happen. So, the big mistake that a lot of these inventors do, and a lot of these groups that try to do this, is that they do it secretively, and they think that they're off the radar scope. And I said, look, you could be in the middle of the Amazon jungle, and the guys who want to know what you're doing, they're going to know what you're doing. They're going to know. So don't delude yourself. And this is why, by being as open and transparent, and also in the R&D effort to have the public involved and to have the public know about everything we're doing when we're doing. I had people writing me and attacking me when I was talking about going to get the genetic material from this little possible ET body, saying, don't talk about it, keep it secret. And I said, look, the people I need to worry about know if I sneeze. But if the public knows about it and the plane I'm on gets blown up, then it becomes a scandal. So I said, I think we're better served by being very open about this.
I agree. Well, I'm going to pray for you anyway.
Oh, yeah, well, do. Thank you. Thank you. And, well, it was great. I hope to see you again soon. And by the way, you're right there in Southern California. We're going to have our Los Angeles premiere of the film, we hope, in March or April. It's really being held up by getting the rest of the tests done. But I hope to see you there.
You're going to send me an invite?
Of course.
Good, good. By the way, my own movie just came out. I don't know if
Wonderful.
you know, I'm in a movie called Pre-Magic Words. It just premiered in L.A., London, and Tokyo. I'm in there with Neil Donald Walsh and some other what they thought were new thought leaders. So look for Pre-Magic Words in theaters soon.
Oh, fun. That sounds great. Well, there are a lot of people with our similar interests coming forward. Stephen Alton, another Steve, who's written book Phobos and a lot of novels that include information about Disclosure Project, has gotten involved, and of course I mentioned Thomas Jane, the actor, and our science advisor was recently on Shirley MacLaine's radio show, and there are all kinds of folks. Dana Aykroyd and others are getting endorsing what we're doing. So I'm hoping that this will just continue to keep the ball rolling, and I appreciate your networking help, Stephen. You've done a great job helping us get this far.
Yeah, we're just starting.
We're just starting. That's right. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time. I thank you again. I thank you so much for your time and your insights into consciousness and this issue, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon in California for the premiere.
I'm looking forward to it. Continue success.
All right. Thank you so much.
Namaste.
All right. Namaste. And thanks again to the World Puja Network. Thank you all for your giving us the time to share this information with your listeners. And until next time, keep looking up. God